Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 693, and today's date is June 16th, 2015, and the title of this episode is The U.S. Government Central Bank Illusionary Recovery is Collapsing. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand the situation in Greece. It is getting worse and worse as time goes on. The creditors, the government of Greece, they cannot come to any type of understanding whatsoever. And we knew this was going to happen because the creditors, they want austerity implemented on the people. And of course, the government was elected not to implement austerity. And this is going to be a problem. And right now, Tsipras is calling the IMF stance absolutely criminal. And we see he is continually saying that oligarchs, not pensioners, should pay for the crisis. ECB insists on tactics that strangle Greece, and yes, they do. They're not spurring economic growth in Greece. They're just giving them more and more debt. People are losing jobs. The economy is not growing. And we can see at this point in time, Greece is looking away from the Eurozone. They are looking towards Russia. They're looking towards China and the BRICS system. And we see at this point in time, coming from the IMF, coming from the ECB, we could see that they are preparing for a Greek exit. The ECB may use the nuclear option and yank Greece's ELA. And they're looking to impose capital controls on Greece if no deal is concluded by the weekend. And we all knew this was going to happen. We knew, using the bail-in documents, they were going to shut down the banks, impose capital controls, take the people's money, and this is why the people have been withdrawing their money non-stop. And we know that Tsipras is meeting with Putin. They're going to be talking about economic deals. They're going to talk about the Turkish pipeline. We know that Washington wants Greece to take the alternate pipeline. That's not Russian. And we see that, no, Greece is actually leaning towards the Turkish pipeline. They're getting ready to sign. And this is not going to go well with the private Western central bankers. And we could see at this point in time that this entire collapse situation is accelerating now. Because once Greece, if they decide, or should I say when they decide, to leave the Eurozone, other countries are going to look at this. Other countries are going to say, you know what? We need to do the same exact thing, and the Eurozone will be ripped apart. Derivative market will collapse unless the bankers stop it somehow. They always have something up their sleeve to keep the system going a little bit longer so they do not get hurt. And we know this. We've seen this in the past. We see in Italy, the public debt hit a new record high of 2.1945 trillion euros in April, up 10 billion euros on the previous high set in March. And we understand throughout the Eurozone, this entire system is completely falling apart. It cannot be sustained. And each one of these countries are putting on more debt. They're implementing austerity. More people are losing work. More people are losing their homes. They cannot pay for food. And the economies are imploding. It cannot work this way. We see in Canada, everything seemed fine. Real estate was booming. Manufacturing was fine. And we see things now completely falling apart. We're starting to see real estate slow. We're starting to see prices leveling off. We're starting to see demand come down. We're starting to see manufacturing getting hit very hard. And not just because of the oil bust. That did play a very big role, but we're starting to see that the lower Canadian dollar, which they thought was going to boost manufacturing and increase exports, didn't really do what they wanted it to do. The loonie dropped about 17% against the US dollar from January 2014 through mid-March 2015, though it has ticked up a smidgen, but the whole thing didn't work. Manufacturing sales fell by 2.1%, and that was in April. And we're seeing sales of food drop by 5.7% in April, the largest monthly drop since August of 2013. But the problem isn't limited to 1 month. Sales are now down 7.3% from July of 2014, the largest and steepest such decline since the financial crisis. Aerospace products down negative 17.8%. Petroleum and coal products down negative 2.7%. Motor vehicles down negative 2.5%. Machinery down negative 2.7%. New orders fell by negative 5.6% in April. It's not looking good. We know the Baltic Dry Index is very low. It's hovering around 650 points right now. Very, very low at this point. And we see here in the United States, the U.S. government, the central bankers, they're continually using the recovery illusion, and that illusion is collapsing now. We're starting to see the collapse shine through this, and they just don't want to admit it. They're too busy provoking wars around the world to cover up this entire economic collapse. We see the empire-fed manufacturing has now missed expectations for 8 of the last 9 months. June's negative 1.98 print was completely opposite of what they thought they were going to do. They thought it was going to increase, not decrease. This is the lowest since January of 2013. New orders also tumbled, and we're starting to see that manufacturing is completely falling apart. Future inventories index plunge 20 points to negative 17.3. We are starting to see U.S. industrial production the weakest since January of 2010. I mean, they thought that this was going to increase, and we're seeing a decrease. This is the fourth of the last 5 months that it has missed. This has not been seen outside the recession. So they thought they were going to get a 0.3% gain, but it dropped by 0.2% in May. This means we are headed towards a complete collapse of the system. The year-on-year is flashing recessionary red. It's telling us that we are headed in this direction, and we see this. I mean, the U.S. government, the central bankers, they can't figure out, why aren't the American people out there purchasing? It makes no sense. The numbers show that everything is fine. Unemployment is down 5.5%. Housing is way up. They're living in an illusionary world. They're not living in the real world. And them taking this entire economy, creating bubbles everywhere, does not work when people do not have high-paying, good-paying jobs. Yes, those people, the elites, the people who are making a lot of money from the Fed creating all this money, they're scratching their head. I'm fine. Look, I'm making tons of money out of this. But the everyday American, the middle class, those people who actually support the economy, it's not working. They're being laid off from their jobs. They can't find the jobs. They don't have the job, or they get a part-time job from a full-time job. They don't have the funds. A lot of people lost their wealth back in 2008. They lost their retirement. They lost their homes. Their credit was completely wiped out. They lost their savings. They're trying to get back on their feet. And guess what? They can't find the same level of job anymore. It's lower. So they're living month to month. And those people who are being laid off now, they're starting to realize, yeah, there are no jobs out there. We see the Gap right now. Guess what? They're going to be closing 175 stores. They're shutting down 25% of all of its specialty stores in the U.S. They're laying off 250 people from their headquarters, and thousands of people are going to be let off from these stores. Where are these people going to find work? This is the question, because we're seeing more and more retail shops closing down. We see corporations in the main offices, people who have good, high-paying jobs being let go. I mean, look at HSBC, look at JP Morgan, look at Dell, look at Sony, IBM, all of these jobs. And there's many more than what I just mentioned. And I'm not even talking about all the stores that closed down, which we mentioned in many, many reports. I mean, we're looking at GM Orion Assembly Plant getting rid of 100 people. Zotis, 165. Stat Oil, up to 2,000. Honeywell System, 252. This goes on and on and on. But again, we have to remember, the United States government central bankers, they don't report on layoffs. They got rid of that department. They cut it because of budgetary constraints. So as of 2013, you don't know how many people are being let go at this point. And this is why we are here. We're trying to figure out what's going on and what we see coming right now, because we've been watching all the indicators. We've been looking at the retail shops closing down. We've been looking at all the layoffs. We've been looking at real estate completely imploding on itself. We see the economy completely falling apart right in front of us. And again, people are not going to recognize this, especially those people who are still sleeping, until the market comes crumbling down. Then people wake up and go, wow, this just happened. No, it's been happening all along. And you didn't realize it because you're listening to the corporate media who are telling you that everything is fine. That every time something drops down, this is what the recovery looks like. But it isn't a recovery. It is a collapse. We're seeing housing starts right now. They plunged by 11% as of April. So what happened here? People are not buying the houses. Now, this is a problem because this is the hot season for real estate. People are not going out and they're not purchasing homes. So they're not building more homes. And we heard from builders, traffic is drying up. Yes, all of a sudden we saw permits soar, but permits are meaningless. Yes, it's the first stage for someone building something, but anybody can go in and ask for permits. And of course, they do this to keep the bubble alive, to make you think in your mind, well, a lot of people, put in for permits. That must mean they're going to be building a lot of homes. But if the people don't have the money for these homes, the people are not getting the mortgages for the homes, it is completely meaningless. I mean, they thought this was going to drop by 4%. It came down 11%. This is the third of the last four that it missed. This tells us that something is wrong here. And when I look around the country, what do I see? I see more and more homes on the market longer. A lot of people think that their houses are going to sell with a snap of a finger. Now, this is not happening in all the places at once. It doesn't work that way. For all those people who are going to say, well, it's not in my area, of course it might not be. And what happens is it starts in certain areas, then it spreads across the country. So this is a really good indicator because this is what happened back in 2007, 2008. We saw it in certain areas. Other people were saying they were booming, fantastic. And then all of a sudden, it spread and everything came to a screeching halt. So this is a good indicator. So if you're out there flipping and you're out there doing speculation, this is a good time to say, let me look at what's going on. And maybe I should start wrapping things up. This is my personal opinion. You do what you need to do. Because as we know, when the entire system came crashing down in 2008, everyone was left with a lot of real estate, no one to sell it to, and a lot of those people went bankrupt. A lot of people had a lot of foreclosures. They lost their own home. And we're starting to see this now. Fannie Mae is at it again. Loan to value ratio now higher than during the housing bubble back in 2008, 2007. What does this tell us? This tells us we're headed down the same path again. And we understand from other countries when they look at the situation, they realize, well, the dollar, it's an antiquated old system. It's at its end game. Russia understands this. China understands this. The entire BRICS system understands this. And those people who are sitting around the G7 summit that was taking place last week, they didn't invite Russia or China. And you know what? Russia and China doesn't care. Because they look at that and they say, the G7, the meeting of the Western debtors. That's how they perceive it. That is the old system. That's the old system. That's the antiquated system that is leaving now. Here comes the new one. And the U.S. government central bankers, they realize that this system cannot continually go on. And this is why we see war being provoked in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in the Pacific, and in Africa. Because they realize they need to cover up this collapse. We see China is continually dumping U.S. treasuries. China dumps a record of $120 billion via Belgium. So no one can figure out what's really going on. Because, again, you have to remember, they don't want to just come out and just dump it right out in the open. They want to do it a little slowly, a little bit at a time. Maybe take some of that and turn it into gold. And we can see this is exactly what they're doing right now. Now, we understand the U.S. government, UK government, a lot of the private Western central bank countries, their governments, and I'm not saying the other governments don't do this, most of them do, but they love pushing out propaganda. And we understand the U.S. loves doing this because under Amendment 114 of the NDAA, Section 501c, the U.S. is allowed to use propaganda on their people. And so is the people, the British government. They do the same thing. And they use the corporate media to push out the propaganda, because we saw it this weekend in the Sunday Times. They ran an article under the headline, "British Spies Betrayed to Russians and Chinese." And it looks like they were attacking Edward Snowden. The sources painted a picture of Edward Snowden having endangered the lives of spies and informants, jeopardizing state operations. The Times article was replete with unfounded assertions and distortions and outright lies. Both Russia and China were said to have cracked the top-secret cache of files stolen by the fugitive U.S. whistleblower Edward Snowden, forcing MI6 to pull agents out of live operations in hostile countries. Well, Glenn Greenwald was out there, who worked closely with Snowden, and he rebutted the Times, noting the whole article does literally nothing other than, quote, anonymous British officials, while offering zero evidence or confirmation for any of its claims. He noted several particularly glaring falsehoods. When Snowden left Hong Kong, he took no files with him, having given them to the journalists with whom he worked, and then destroying his copy so that it wouldn't be vulnerable as he traveled. How then could Russia have obtained Snowden's files as the story claims? His documents were encrypted, but they were completely secure. If he did not even have physical possession of them, how did they break the files and how did they get them? So we can see there's holes in the story. And we're starting to see that all of this turned out to be propaganda, and it is backfiring on them. And Greenwald went on further to say that the Sunday Times outright fabricated all of this information to support their key point, that Snowden had files with him in Moscow. This is the only fact included in their story that suggests Snowden had files with him when he left Hong Kong, and it completely demonstrates how false this is. And he's saying that they completely made all of this up, and they have absolutely no evidence. And if we look at the propaganda from the corporate media and the governments, we always see that they can never back up their claims. It's always someone who's anonymous. They never have satellite imagery. They never have documentation. They just use propaganda to make you believe. And remember, journalists are supposed to have their sources. They're supposed to have their facts. They're supposed to have their information. So if the story is questioned, they can pull down and say, yes, here are the facts. But guess what? There is no more journalism anymore. They're taking the information from the governments and they're just running with it. And this is what we are seeing today. I mean, look in Ukraine. All we see is complete propaganda and it's nonstop. It's completely ongoing. And we see Poroshenko on Monday has said that Russia's $3 billion loan to his country was a bribe sealed by ousted Ukraine President Yanukovych. According to Poroshenko, the whole situation around the money with Russia loaned to Ukraine in 2013 was dubious. The reason for this is because they signed a new bill and they do not want to pay this back. They can't make the next loan payment. They don't want to pay the next loan payment. So they're telling and they're making this story up of why they don't have to pay it back. And again, with no facts, with no proof, with nothing. We see out in Ukraine, Ukraine's premier warned Friday that Kiev would freeze its debt repayments if no immediate deal was found with private lenders because it has to fund its escalating campaign against the southeastern people. They need this money to support the armed forces, to go after these people. And we can see this is exactly what they're doing. They're getting ready for a major offensive. We see Putin is saying that he will have to put some intercontinental ballistic missiles, at least 40 of them, into service by the end of 2015 because of what the U.S. and NATO are doing. If the U.S. and NATO bring in missiles, ballistic missiles, and place this in Eastern Europe and in UK, it leaves Russia no choice. And this is exactly what they want to do. They want to make it look like Russia now is placing 40 missiles, but they never tell you that the US, NATO, UK were the first ones who decided that this might be an option. And if they go ahead with the option, then Russia will counter this. Russia's not just going ahead and putting missiles out there. They're waiting to see what the US, what NATO are going to do. But we can see the U.S., NATO are continually bringing in more and more military assets because they're getting prepared for World War III. Israel is out there and they're saying Iranian hackers have compromised computers of the Israeli security companies and academics. They wanted to steal sensitive data. Now, this is absolutely ridiculous. What would be the motivation for Iran at this point in time to cyber attack Israel or the U.S. or anyone while they're in peace deals with Russia, UK, United States? Again, Israel is not part of this. And they want the sanctions lifted. They want commerce to come back. What would be their motive at this point? There is none. What would be the motive of Israel making this up? They don't want the P5+1 to go through. They want Iran out of the picture. They've been doing this for 30 years. They've been saying that they have a nuclear weapon. And they're going to be ready in 3 to 5 months, in 6 weeks. They have one already. And they keep saying this. It's propaganda. The U.S. goes along with this. We see out in the Middle East, things are not going well in Yemen. Again, the Geneva talks are all about the Houthis basically putting down their weapons and surrendering. They're saying there'll be no ceasefire in Yemen until the Houthis withdraw all of their units from the cities and release all prisoners, and they surrender and they allow the puppet regime back in. These aren't talks, these are demands. We saw the same thing with Assad. They had one demand. Assad stepped down. This is why the talks went nowhere, because they're not talks. They are demands. These are not peace talks. They are demands. We see the commander of the U.S. Central Command, General Lloyd Austin, met with the head of the Iraqi Kurdistan Regional Government, Masoud Barzani, to discuss deployment of American commando and black ops teams in Kurdistan. So, boots on the ground. Which we know we already have boots on the ground because we know there were boots in the ground in Syria for that raid. And we can see Iraq's Kurdistan region has been serving as a regional station for U.S., Israeli, and British special operation teams, where French weapons have also been stored in large depots. And it looks like they are getting ready to have forces in Kurdistan. They're going to be bringing more troops in. We know 450 combat-ready Marines are ready to go in there. There'll be another 450 or 500 to follow. They're building small hubs all around. They're creating a new base, the fifth one now, because this is getting prepared to push back the people, to divide Iraq and the Middle Eastern countries into 3 separate areas, and then eventually go into Assad and remove him. And we understand they need to get back into those countries where the people are rising up, and they're rising up in all these countries. In Libya, in Lebanon, we know, in Yemen, in Iraq. And we see right now is that the U.S. bombed Libya. Officials unclear who was actually slain in the strike. A U.S. airstrike overnight yesterday in Libya was initially reported to have killed al-Qaeda figure, but after Libyan officials initially confirmed this, they followed up by saying they were unsure who was actually killed with this U.S. strike. And again, they always tell you they're going after this scary al-Qaeda leader. No, what they're really doing is they're pushing back the people, and they're getting ready to go full-time into Libya. Remember, they moved the central bank out of Tripoli. They were trying to take control of the oil sales. It really is not working out. And now it seems like they're getting ready to go into Libya and do the same exact thing that's happening in Yemen. And it looks like they're starting to maneuver strikes into this area. And of course, they're going to be saying, we can do this because we're going after al-Qaeda. Remember, the old legislation that was passed, anywhere al-Qaeda is, the U.S. can go into these countries and use force against the terrorist organization. With the new legislation, the authorization for war, they can go after the Islamic State, al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, al-Shabaab, or any other terrorist organization. So we can see they might use this to go after al-Qaeda. They're using Saudi Arabia as a proxy army to go into Yemen. And right now, in other countries where the Islamic State is, they can't do anything because they have no authorization. And we can see they're building up the propaganda because they're getting ready to go after Assad. They're getting ready to go back into these countries, and they want to restore the puppet regimes back in these countries. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said Tuesday he had discussed Syria's use of chemical weapons with Russia and that efforts were underway to stop it. So right now he's talking to Russia. He wants Russia to help stop this. And Assad is not using the chemical weapons, it's the Islamic State. And Russia is continually saying, yeah, Assad's not using chemical weapons here. But the U.S. is trying to make it look like Russia knows about it. Russia is with Assad. They're doing the same thing they're doing in Ukraine now in Syria. Kerry said he was confident the government of Syrian President Assad was responsible for the chemical attacks, and that everyone's patience is wearing thin at this point. This tells us, because as we know, propaganda, then they're getting ready to move in. And we have to remember that during the summer months, especially in August, this is when Congress leaves, everything's quiet, and this is where Obama usually ends up doing something. And at this point in time, it seems there's a lot of propaganda flying around. The indicators are definitely pointing to something happening. We're in the month of June, and we see the propaganda is accelerating. And they're throwing more and more information out there. Now, can things change as we move towards August? Of course they can. But all indicators are definitely pointing to it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was some type of false flag event like we saw back in 2013, like we saw in 2014, and here we come 2015. And now John Kerry is on the phone with Lavrov. He's going to be talking about Ukraine, Syria, Yemen, Libya. It's all very strange how it's all the places they need to get back into and the places where the U.S. wants to go. And of course, I just can imagine what this phone call is all about, where he's talking to Russia saying, listen, I know you back Syria, I know you back Ukraine, and I know you working with the Iraqi government, but we want to split this entire Middle East region into Kurdish, Shiite, and Sunni. We want to get into Syria, And if this P5+1 talk doesn't go as planned, we really want to get into Iran. And please don't stand in our way, because we just want all of this to prop up the system. If you do get in our way, so be it. We are willing to take that risk, because we'll just have a ton of American kids go over and do our bidding to keep the central bank alive. That's the risk we're willing to take. And we can see this is what they've been shooting for. And we can see the propaganda with China cyber attacking the United States. And what's funny about all of this is that they still have no evidence that China actually was behind the attack. They have no evidence that North Korea was behind the attack. They have no evidence about anything, nothing that they can produce. So what are they going to do? Well, the White House today issued an order across various government departments to step up computer security, because they're expecting more China attacks. Why is this all happening at this point? Well, we understand the economy is collapsing. We understand the IMF is saying that the yuan is not undervalued. The yuan looks like it could fit into the reserve currency status. The AIIB was created and a lot of the countries joined up with it. The BRIC system is pushing forward, making economic deals around the world. And the U.S. government, the central bankers, they are preparing for war, because this system is collapsing. This whole illusionary recovery is completely falling apart right in front of their eyes. Their statistical numbers that they keep throwing out at us makes no sense, because if the unemployment continually goes down and we're at 5.5%, and you know what's going to happen, they're going to drop it down to 5.4 or 5.3 once again, and they're going to tell us that everything is fine, we're in this fantastic recovery. They're going to recalculate and cherry pick the data for the GDP. Look, GDP is at 3%, 2%. See, everything's fine. Even though the manufacturers aren't producing, people aren't buying, people are out of work. But what we're seeing right now is all the real economic indicators and their statistical fake numbers are on the opposite ends of the world at this point. They don't even make sense. And as we come out of this summer, we're going to see real estate fall apart. We're going to see the holiday seasons completely a disaster. And they know this. This is why they're accelerating everything. This is why they're pushing for war. This is why the propaganda is coming out right now. And this is why we see all of this occurring. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.